Did you want to start with a little disclaimer?
Let me be very clear. Nothing that you are going to hear or see today is intended for legal advice. This is not an attorney-client relationship. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. And most importantly, it is absolutely not me. That is the disclaimer I wanted to say before we began. So thank you so much.
You can't be more succinct than that. Well, Matt, what perfect timing. We're hearing a discussion about nuclear verdicts, and we've got an almost brand new one. 2 weeks old. More than $100 million, $125 million in punitive damages in Florida, about 41.5 in actual, or maybe 16.5 in actual and compensatory damages. And I just think it's not an important case, but we just have to recap the craziness of it. The truck, as far as I know, was a one-truck operation owned by a woman who had a full-time job as a school janitor and hired a driver who had a list of violations 1.5 miles long, who caused an accident. Fortunately, nobody was killed, but there were some serious injuries. And you've got now $125 million punitive damages, which will never, ever be collected.
Yeah, that's right.
And but it yet adds to the body of law of nuclear verdicts. But we've also got something very close at hand. On December 3rd, I believe it is, the oral arguments before the Texas Supreme Court in the Werner case. This is an important case, not just because it's a large publicly traded company, but there are, anytime I've written a story about the Werner case, and I've written several, the comments section on FreightWaves.com fills up.
Absolutely. How many of you have heard of the Werner Enterprises case? Raise of hands. Okay. It is not all of you, so after this, you will now know about this case. This is the most important case facing the trucking industry right now. These are the facts. A truck operated by Werner Enterprises was traveling below the posted speed limit. It was snowing. The driver was relatively new, 7 days on the job. The trainer for that driver was asleep in the back because the way that trainers work in this industry is it's kind of like a team operation. In the opposite lane, in the different direction, is a pickup truck. That truck was driving too fast for conditions. Why? We know this because they lost control. They spun out, crossed the center line, 10 yards of median, and collided head-on with the vehicle operated by Werner Enterprises. One child died, and another child was critically injured. And the question was, who's at fault? Who's responsible for this? Well, here's what happened. It went to trial. And at the trial, the jury found, that the driver for Werner was 14% responsible. The driver for the pickup truck was 16% responsible. Now, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a mathematician. But we're missing some liability, missing some percentage. They found Werner 70% responsible for this catastrophic accident. $100 million. $100 million when there was nothing that the truck operated by Werner could have done to avoid another vehicle losing control and crashing into them head on. Well, Werner appealed the case. They went to the Texas Appellate Court. And the Appellate Court looked at it and said, that's right. That's the right outcome. Now, the interest continues to gather after the judgment. Now this number is $130 million. It is on appeal at the Texas Supreme Court with oral arguments, as you mentioned, on December 3rd. This is the most important case in our industry because where these verdicts go is where your premiums begin to rise. This is the nature of this industry. So we need to be aware of these things. The ATA, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and others are filing briefs in support of overturning this judgment. But this is one of the most important cases facing our industry, and it is absolutely bananas. It is bananas.
Now let's note a couple of things here that I think the jury may have considered. I'm not arguing for them, but playing devil's advocate here. A couple of things. Number one, there was no CB radio in the truck, which otherwise might have enabled the dispatcher to tell the driver to slow down, given that the conditions were bad. The conditions were bad enough that apparently the Werner truck was going faster than almost all the other traffic on the highway, which had slowed down considerably. I guess the fact that the trainer was asleep in the sleeper berth was considered significant, even if it's normal standard procedure. But my point here is that these are things that were considered by the jury in reaching their decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what they really came to the argument was had Werner been going slower, the accident wouldn't have happened. Now the reality is, one of the things you don't do as a lawyer is take to trial when a child passes away, because you're not going to win those verdicts. The jury's not going to look at you and say, maybe you weren't wrong for what you did. But this type of liability, when you do not lose control, under the posted speed limit, well-maintained truck and trailer, and you are still held responsible, there but for the grace of God go any of us. When someone else is going too fast, lose control, and smash into you. So we have to be vigilant on these things and be educated about what's happening. Safely delivering freight on time and undamaged is difficult even under the best circumstances. But they are at war with our industry, and these cases show us what's happening.
Do you think the lack of a CB radio was a significant factor here?
No, it's absurd. The idea that they used in that argument was, had they used a CB, other drivers would have told you, hey, you're going too fast. But again, they were under the posted speed limit, never losing control. That is what you're legally required to do. That is not what was put on the thing when it came to Werner. They are liable because this other vehicle lost control and smashed into them.
To your point about higher premiums, let's note that Werner has said on several occasions in filings with the SEC about this that their out-of-pocket exposure is at $10 million. So clearly the insurance will cover the rest.
Yeah, so big motor carriers have self-insurance typically, and the $10 million is the self-insurance that they have. Now, the umbrella policy is what goes on these bigger verdicts. And so a quick thing I'll mention to everybody. So a nuclear verdict is not a legal term. That is not invented by lawyers. A nuclear verdict is an industry term that means any judgment over $10 million. And if you go to over $100 million, we call them a thermonuclear verdict. Those are the phrases that we use. That hopefully helps you understand this a little bit better.
Yeah, let me note that in the first months on the job here at FreightWaves in 2018, I wrote a story about a big verdict, and I don't remember which one it was, but it was under $100 million. Now we've got several verdicts over $100 million since that time. There was that other crazy one in Florida that was like $500 million. Again, over one truck company, totally uncollectible. But it just shows you that this is not typical. Something clearly has happened here, that things have gone nuclear.
I think the plaintiff's attorneys are getting smarter to our industry. So for those of you who don't know, the minimum insurance required to operate a truck interstate is $750,000. That number was established in 1980, and it's never been changed. They've tried to adjust it for inflation, and every time they've been just denied. It's never been moved.
Well, let's note that New Jersey on July 1st increased in-state to $1.5 million.
Absolutely. And our out-of-service rate for commercial vehicles is 21% or so. So imagine if I was a milk salesman and I had 5 gallons of milk and I said, one of these gallons of milk is unsafe. You'd say, Matt, I would prefer not to buy milk from you. But the reality is that's what our transportation industry is. People are learning about this, which is why we should talk about the Wabash case, because that's another case that is absolutely bonkers in this industry.
Okay, so Wabash, I think that verdict is over $400 million.
That's
correct. Right. That was was that the one in St. Louis?
Yes, that's right.
St. Louis court. So again, none of these are rising yet to a level of a federal case.
Yeah, that's right.
So you want to recap what happened?
How many of you have heard of the Wabash case? And raise your hands. Oh my God. Okay.
FreightWaves wrote about all of these things, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? You should all be raising your hand.
This case should terrify every single person in this room. The facts are this. In 2004, Wabash made a trailer. And that trailer had a thing called a rear impact guard. Many of you might call them an ICC bumper. A rear impact guard is designed to prevent something called an underride. An underride is a disinfected way of saying decapitation. When you smash into the back of a trailer and you go underneath the rear door frame, you will lose your head. In 2004, when that trailer was manufactured, the rear impact guard had to satisfy a rear impact of 30 miles an hour or slower. Now, that number's changed. Now, today, it's 35 miles an hour. But the facts of the Wabash case in 2019, a vehicle with a driver and a passenger were driving, and the trailer was operated by GDS Express, and GDS Express was stopped. And that car smashed into the back of that trailer at over 55 miles an hour. Both the driver and the passenger died instantly. Now, what the jury didn't hear, but you will hear, is that the driver for that car was inebriated, twice the legal limit when it comes to alcohol. Both the driver and the passenger weren't wearing seatbelts. It goes to trial. GDS Express goes bankrupt. They're done. They're out. That's over. They look at Wabash, and they say, Wabash, you knew, or you should have known, that someone would hit the back of that trailer in excess of 35 miles an hour. And it went to trial. And the jury came back and said, the passenger and the driver each get $6 million in compensatory damages. That compensatory damages is the compensation, the value of the life. And they assessed $450 million in punitive damages. And how did they get that number? They said Wabash knew for at least 30 years that the rear impact guard was insufficient to prevent an underride at 55 miles an hour. And they said they made $15 million of profit every single year because they didn't have a more robust rear impact guard that was not federally required. So 15 times 30 gets you $450 million.
Right. There was an underride guard on the truck, but I think the argument was that it should have been even sturdier.
Absolutely.
To have stopped that 55-mile-an-hour personal vehicle.
If that is true, every one of the 5 million trailers in the United States right this second is dangerous and defective. Not a single trailer is tested for 55-mile-an-hour rear impact. They're not tested this way. So the question becomes, if this is the standard, what do we do as motor carriers? What do we do as manufacturers? How are we going to think about trailers? Should we have them specify with more robust rear impact? Should it be 70 miles an hour? This is absolutely absurd. There is no reasonable way you get to this conclusion. Now, I will say Missouri has had tort reform. And what tort reform typically means is it reduces the overall liability. So under the Missouri's tort reform bill, what it does is the punitive damages cannot exceed 5 times compensatory. So the $12 million in compensatory, times that by 5, now your total exposure could be $70 million.
Right. As we mentioned, this is a recent case within the last 6 months, so there's been nothing's going to, I mean, it might have been appealed, but there's been no decisions on appeal yet.
Yeah, so this is the thing I tell everyone I've talked to, is that this is just a single data point. We have no real clear understanding if it will survive on appeal. Again, the ATA, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Trailer Manufacturer Association, they are all in this thing, making sure they're advocating for their members. But this kind of liability is catastrophic. You cannot survive. Wabash is a great company, like $3 billion a year annually. They could not survive $462 million. It is absolutely bananas.
Now, I don't know which came first, the Daimler case or the Wabash case. I think it was the Wabash case.
Yeah, Wabash first, Daimler came second.
And then we have a Daimler case. I've forgotten what state that's in.
So I don't know. I think it was either Alabama or possibly Louisiana. But how many of you have heard about the Daimler case? Anyone heard the Daimler case?
Yeah,
oh, you don't know about Daimler.
That was a little less sexy, but anyway.
So the Daimler case, this is the facts. These are the facts. The driver is in a vehicle manufactured by Daimler. In the opposite lane of traffic, another vehicle loses control and comes to collide with him head on. The driver for that truck spins the wheel and avoids the collision. But the truck rolls over. And when the truck rolls over, the cab collapses. And when the cab collapses, it breaks the driver's neck. He is paralyzed from the neck down. And the question was, who's responsible? Who's responsible? Well, they sued the other passenger vehicle. They got a settlement there. But they sued Daimler because Daimler had a seat that you could buy as an upgrade. That upgraded seat was about, let's say, $1,000. And when you have a rollover, it would pull you down so that you would not have your head and your neck broken by the collapsing cab. And so the question becomes, is a safety feature that is optional mandatory? $160 million against Daimler. What will Daimler do? Does it mean we have to make sure every single truck has every single safety feature at all times? This is, again, being appealed, but this trend of enormous verdicts is not slowing down. And eventually, we all think, well, the manufacturer will deal with this, or the motor carrier. But do not think the brokers are immune. The brokers can also be wrapped into these things. So the liability that faces our industry is catastrophic. It is astonishing. And we all need to be aware of it so we understand the risk that we're actually getting ourselves into.
All right, let's talk about broker liability. I think on that front, brokers have been doing pretty well. There's one case out there, Miller versus C.H. Robinson, which the Supreme Court chose not to review, and that still stands in the Ninth Circuit. That holds the broker, and obviously C.H. Robinson, liable for what happened. I don't even really know what happened in that accident. But there have been several other cases where even if the lower court ruled against the broker, it was overturned on appeal, and has then on further appeal, like to the Supreme Court, went nowhere. So I think the industry is kind of winning, wouldn't you say, on the broker liability issue?
I think if you're a broker, it has some very good indications that you may not be responsible, but this is the central idea. If you're a broker, you care about price, route, and service. You are not guaranteeing the performance of the motor carrier. You're not a co-employer of the motor carrier. But what has happened, the C.H. Robinson case specifically, a small motor carrier has a catastrophic accident. The legal limit for their liability is $750,000. Where are you going to go for the money? You're going to go for the broker and say, broker, you should have known. You should have known this guy was unsafe. And that case in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has now been held that a broker can be liable for the negligence of a motor carrier. The Seventh Circuit, the exact opposite conclusion. Global Trans versus Yee. The exact same set of facts. Motor carrier does something terrible. They go after the broker because the broker's got the money. Now, brief segue onto insurance generally. Insurance gives you two things. There's the duty to defend and the duty to indemnify. Defend means they will pay for your lawyer to fight this litigation. Indemnify is when they pay the liability that you've accrued. The duty to defend is far broader. So if you have insurance, lawyers will defend you. If you don't have the insurance, you're paying out of pocket. But ultimately, the Seventh Circuit and the Ninth Circuit disagree. And both of these cases have an appeal to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has said, I'm not interested in this. It's not interesting enough for us to take on yet. So as a broker, are you liable when the motor carrier does something terrible? The answer is it depends. You have no way to know.
Were you surprised they didn't take really the second one, the global trans, because at that point you did have two circuits clearly in conflict, which is often really what the Supreme Court looks for in deciding what cases to take.
So the Supreme Court, SCOTUS is a very interesting organization. It's a really cool part of our government. And I don't think there's enough conflict. I think the 11th Circuit is going the same route as the 7th Circuit. So I think we're seeing more that the brokers are not going to be held liable.
Which was the 11th Circuit case?
So that was a Landstar case. That was a theft of cargo.
Oh, the Landstar case, right.
So,
yes.
I mean, so the reality is, like, we don't necessarily know when SCOTUS will take this up. We probably need more litigation, more brokers being sued, more liability verdicts being made, and ultimately we'll get the Supreme Court to want to weigh in. But right now, it's not enough. There's not enough conflict among the circuits. There's a couple that have reached conclusions, but we live in the most distracted society that has ever existed. You go down the highway, people are on their phones looking at that thing as they are driving. And then you ask yourself, why are we having this rise in nuclear verdicts? Because everyone's not paying attention. And then you have someone die, and then the litigation commences, and they're seeing these numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger. And even if you've complied with everything, you've done everything right, you may still be held liable.
We have just about a minute and a half. Coming back to the Wabash case, I really wonder whether the industry, pretty much consistent opposition to side underrides, might fade a little bit. I mean, if they're looking now at saying, well, we're going to have to fortify our rear underrides, but we're going to fight the side underrides too, that seems a little inconsistent.
This is fascinating. So our industry has been wrestling for years, decades, about side underride protection. Imagine a tractor trailer is turning in the middle of a median and a car smashes into the side of that trailer. You have an underride. You have a decapitation. So in our trailers today, you see these side skirts. They're aerodynamic. They have nothing to do with preventing underride on the side of a trailer. But now we have seen a manufacturer held liable for something that they never had a legal requirement to do. So the idea that a side underride is something that you're not going to see happen, absolutely not. We will see those cases. We will see somebody win in a side underride case and say, manufacturer, you knew You knew this happened, and therefore you should have done something to prevent it. And then our industry bears that cost. The side underride is thousands of dollars to install, and it's thousands of pounds to make them effective. They are not legally required, but we will see what happens over the next few years.
Well, you timed it absolutely perfect, Matt. Absolutely perfect. What a good boy. Matt Leffler, the armchair attorney. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.